Good morning. Welcome to the University of Johannesburg Art Gallery and to the exhibition by Paul Emmanuel titled Substance of Shadows. Paul Emmanuel was born in Zambia in 1969 and he graduated from the University of the Witwatersrand in 1993. By 1997, he was the very first Ampersand Fellow that visited New York for a 3-month period as part of his fellowship. By 2000, his very first solo show was at the Open Window Art Gallery in Pretoria. Since then, he has exhibited at all the major galleries, museums, the art fairs and arts festivals in South Africa. And internationally, his work has been seen anywhere, amongst others, from Maputo to Morocco, from the Edinburgh Festival in the UK to the Smithsonian Institute in the USA, from the Silt Foundation in Germany to the towns in Italy where he stayed for prolonged periods at residencies and for exhibitions. His artistic practice utilizes various media, including photography and film, to reveal layered visions concerned with his identity living in post-apartheid South Africa. His work has been described in a myriad of monographs and scholarly articles. It's an honor and privilege to host this exhibition, Substance of Shadow, with works on such delicate carbon paper, as well as a filmic intervention at UJ Art Gallery in 2021. Paul will be accompanied by Michelle Constant for a walk through the gallery and to view his works and to get a better idea through their discussion of what it's all about. Michelle Constant's purpose and passion lies in promoting creativity in South Africa, and her motto is, "Change is the only constant." She was the CEO of Business Art South Africa for 11 years until 2019, whereafter she focused on using creative intelligence and shared value tools to facilitate and consult diverse NPC foundations, trusts, and corporates, and host a breakfast show on SAFM over weekends. In between, she still has time for her MPhil in strategy at GIBS at the University of Pretoria, and she also serves on various boards all over the country. The government of France acknowledged her with 2 orders. In 2016 for her work in culture and the arts, and in 2021 for her work in growing cultural relationships between France and South Africa. Enjoy. Good morning, Michelle. Good morning, Paul.
Hi.
Welcome to the UJ Art Gallery. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you.
And I'm looking so forward to this walkabout and to have better insight into your work.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Enjoy. Come walk with me.
So, it's an extraordinary thing to be here with Paul. In fact, I would say it was almost profound looking at some of these works. And one of the things I was talking to Paul about before we came on camera now was this idea of memory and loss. And it's an extremely thought-provoking idea that how we think about the past and where the past is formed, or the seeds of the past, where that takes place, in which part of our body and our mind and our soul is it really formed. And so, Paul, I'm going to crack right in with the title, linked up to this idea of what we're thinking about in terms of memory, substance of shadows.
Well, I suppose it all started with a dream for me. And I had this crazy dream of having my skin peeled away from my body, which is a very gruesome kind of image. But it was also, I suppose, informed by the idea of the atomic bomb exploding with that bright flash of light and charring the skin and having things that one was wearing. And there were victims of the blasts in Japan where patterns of the clothing were actually burnt onto the skin because of the heat and the light of the blasts. And I think that that's where the dream kind of inspired something or ignited an idea in my mind. And that's where the idea of working with this piece of carbon paper that feels very skin-like. If you hold it in your hand, it's it's very thin, it's flimsy, it's pierced quite easily. And that's blackness, if it's the black carbon paper, felt like a charred skin to me. And I started scratching it away with the blade. Yes. And the surface of carbon paper is a mixture of carbon black and wax. And I found that I could actually scrape that away with this tiny blade, make a mark that was transparent so that you could see through this film, and literally change its nature, its whole visual characteristics, completely different.
So I understand, and I've seen the images of you doing it, and certainly we'll see the images of the outcome, but I understand that the time it's taken you to do that is 6 years, which does talk to the idea of time and creativity, time in the arts, time in the soul, time in the maker.
I suppose, yeah, it must do. That was also something not planned in any way. I think a lot of it is intuitive.
Yeah.
I am an obsessive.
That's pretty obvious when you see the work.
6 years of work.
Yeah. So take us further with the idea of carbon paper. I mean, one of the things we were talking about is this idea that carbon paper it's an anachronistic. It's something of the past, even though you're using it in the present, which is a lot about what your work is about. It's about acknowledging the past, but also acknowledging invisible pasts, if one wants to look at it as such.
That certainly occurred to me after the dream and after discovering this piece of carbon paper. I think a lot of my work starts out intuitively, and then kind of piecing together the reasons why I'm drawn to this material as something that is obsolete, that has very little kind of use in today's world. I mean, even, I think there is a small market for carbon paper, but for receipt books and journals and things like that. But I mean, it really isn't used. Everything's on computer. And I found the last piece of carbon paper to be produced in South Africa, to my knowledge, in a factory in Sebenza on the East Rand. But and drove out there, and they gave me a huge roll of carbon paper for free because they had no use for it. It was I just said, yes, please, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I realized also that obsolescence and the fact that it is something from the past was its power in a way for me. And I responded to that. I responded to talking about the past with this past material. And the material was the sort of grappling starting point for everything.
So let's, if we may,
go
and look at one of your works. Okay, so Paul, this work is, I would say, it's an incredibly tender piece. I'll explain that why it feels so tender to me. But why don't you just give us some insights into it?
So ultimately, I mean, many years after having done the work, I decided that this was going to be a self-portrait because it is an image of my feet, ultimately. I suppose it's a bit crazy to think of oneself as defined by one's feet, but I like the idea of, I think there's a lot of characteristics, inner characteristics can be sort of gleaned from looking at people's hands and people's feet. Just that talks as much about the rest of you by looking at something that's such a small kind of frame, And there were images of the shroud going through my mind because this film really lends itself to a transparent piece of fabric. It's a flimsy, skin-like material, silk, not quite a textile. So much has happened since this began, and I've gone through a whole 6-year journey of doing my father, my mother, talking about all sorts of different universal issues and the stuff that's coming off, and saying that's not to be thrown away. That is something to hold on to and keep, and that would become part of the work. And
it's just carbon dust.
I did a bit of research and trying to figure out what it is. And also I had to find out about the archivability of the stuff. Is it going to last? Is it going to last 10 years or 100 years? But essentially, the people at the factory who provided the roll of carbon paper gave me a bit of a breakdown first, and then I contacted a chemist at UJ. And it's carbon black, which is literally carbon, the element of carbon, which it comes in a couple of different forms, like coal, anthracite, and even diamond. Diamond is a form of carbon. Yeah. And mixed with wax, so that they coat the surface of this polyethylene, which is a plastic. It's essentially a plastic. And that is what transfers the image.
And those two are incredibly intimate works about your family, about legacy, about history, heritage, identity, and perhaps that conversation that we had about memory. So should we go and have a look? So Paul, you have to talk about this piece in depth and just tell us about the making, and I suppose also, yeah, about the being of it.
Okay, so this is an image of my father. He took a long time, I would say about a year as well. I had thought about making this work while he was still alive, and I convinced him eventually to let me photograph him with no clothes on, which for a conservative Lebanese Catholic man was not easy. And I mean, he had a deep respect for what I was doing as an artist. Yeah. He really did. But he really did respect what was happening. And ultimately, he let me, I said to him, Daddy, I wouldn't do anything that I haven't done myself, which I suppose is not really comforting, because I've allowed myself to be photographed naked, you know, which a lot of men would never ever do anyway. Yeah. But he did. And it was a great privilege for me to be able to do that. I feel that he only let me do it because he trusted me, which was it was a very intimate and a kind of a humbling experience when he submitted in a way to allowing himself to be exposed in that kind of way, which I had also quite ambivalent feelings about exhibiting this work straight after I had finished it. And that was the start.
And I wondered if he felt that he was in that liminal space between moving between life and death. And indeed, I mean, I look at this and it is an image which is set in a liminal space, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Oh God, I mean, that just went through my mind. Also, I realized when I was taking those photographs that I have to do this now. Otherwise, I'm never going to get this chance.
Yeah. There's movement.
It's me and him. And he is responding to me as, I mean, photography is like that. It's very much about the relationship between who's behind the camera and who's in front of the lens. So that conversation was very important to me.
Paul, why did you make this work?
I made this work because I wanted us to think about our relationships with our fathers. It doesn't matter whether we are men or women or how we identify in terms of gender, or we've all had a father.
So we're going to go to the next primal relationship, but I think what takes us quite beautifully there is also this idea that when I first saw this, I started to think of the Turin shroud.
Yes.
And how, you know, an image may be marked on the fabric. And in many ways, this is an image marked on the fabric.
Absolutely.
Was that anything?
Absolutely. This is actually scaled to an exact scale of the Turin shroud. So the image of my father is to the scale of my father, and the size of the cloth is based as 1.1 by 4.4.
Okay, so we go to the next three pieces. the shroud, the veil.
The veil. This is a replica of my mother's wedding veil, which I, based on photographs that I had found of them getting married in 1954.
I have so many questions about this. But I'm going to start with my obsession around memory. So there's an American psychologist, her name is Elizabeth Loftus. She's quite controversial. And she says that remembrance is a thin veil or fabric between memory and imagination. And I wonder if you could comment on that in relation to this wedding veil that we see.
So I would imagine that she's controversial with that statement, because I would also imagine that the idea of remembering things is so central to our identity. How we perceive ourselves as constructing any kind of narrative of our lives. And I'm fascinated by that statement, and that because I think a lot of latest research indicates that memory is very much a performative. And in that performance of recalling that sort of enactment of what happened, you are constructing it, you're reconstructing that thing. And that's why that comment makes so much sense to me. And it's quite an uncomfortable space to be in, to imagine that, you know, it's not a thing that's set in stone.
Which does raise interesting questions around this, because the image of your father was your father living. This is a physical object. It was a veil, a wedding veil. It would have been a white wedding veil, I'm assuming. So there are all sorts of thoughts and ideas, and I wonder if you could construct the narrative around that. The white veil that possibly had the smell of, you know, your mother. The fact that it then becomes a black veil, which is almost funereal. Talk to us a bit about that.
So this really was also something that started in a very unclear way for me. Unlike what I had with my father's sort of shroud image, which was I saw that shroud in my head, and I got the measurements of the Turin shroud. It was premeditated and preordained. The veil emerged in a way, which I was also thinking around doing a dress, a wedding dress, or a feminine object that spoke to me about femininity in a way that I could relate to in an authentic way. The veil started out as something that spoke to me about the absence of my mother's body. I knew that I didn't want to depict my mother's body. And the veil sort of coalesced around that kind of idea. And the veil is something that reveals the wife at the altar, you know, that whole sort of wedding rite reveals and conceals, and you pull that veil off, you know, and the father of the bride leads this bride down the altar and takes off all of that stuff started to emerge around this object.
So Paul, you were saying you don't know why you can't make light work, like where's the color? But actually,
then there's this,
and there's color.
Blue carbon paper. Yeah.
Sky blue. So I suppose I do want to ask you, why do you feel that you can't make light work? And how do you know that the work isn't light? I mean, is that just a personal...
I think I'm drawn to the dark. I'm drawn to darkness. I suppose many years of therapy lies, you know, in trying to understand why that is. I think there's an enormous power in confronting The shadow, I suppose I'm drawn to
The substance,
of that darkness, and why it fascinates me so much. I suppose I'll never really know completely. I have a few ideas.
There's plenty of light that shines through. I mean, the fact is, even these works can't be seen without the light shining through. So it's quite a beautiful thing.
Even when I was a student, I was doing ridiculous things like mezzotint, which is you start with this velvety blackness and then work your way up to the light and reveal. I've always been drawn to going from dark to light. I suppose maybe that's it.
So let's look at these two, scholars and executives.
I wanted to, I suppose, coming from the veil into creating a garment again was very important for me.
Yeah.
But a masculine garment, or ostensibly masculine.
Yeah.
And I started with the executive jacket first, and used a very ordinary blazer pattern that I could buy commercially, and scraped away the carbon paper until it was almost completely transparent, and then stitched, in inverted commas, the patterns together to create this executive jacket. I think that clothes are important to us because they are incredibly powerful signifiers and how we want to present ourselves to the world. Those kind of really interested me, and how they are really, really powerful signifiers of masculinity.
And you do pick up that later as well with the collars, which we'll get to.
Yes.
But of course, there is the executive adult in many ways, talking to the scholar child, which is the schoolboy jacket. Now, you have to show what's inside the jacket, because it talks to the making.
So that is black carbon paper. I wanted to also talk about the similarity in design between an executive jacket, which is intended for an office of state or a business corporate environment, and how that same sort of design and the symbols that design stands for starts so early on in life. With going to school, you become part of a system, you kind of lose your individuality in a sense. And like joining the army or the military, where you put on a different kind of uniform, you put on the uniform of the school and take on all of the values and symbols of that school. And the blue carbon paper just seemed exactly like the right sort of thing. And I decided to leave the branding of, a commercially bought piece of carbon paper that it comes in an A4 size, and I've stitched them all together to create this one blazer. And I really liked and enjoyed the idea of this lining on the inside of the jacket,
But also, as you were saying when you showed me the first time, like when you touch that, you get this sound of the rustling of leaves, of maybe even dry leaves.
Beautiful. I enjoyed the sound of the rustling of leaves. That was the sort of one association that came to me.
Yeah. All right, let's go to another dialogue. You mentioned them earlier, the brands and the brain.
Absolutely. The brands and the brain. That's a great title.
So this is the branded work, literally called branded. Talk to us.
So here, these are images of the front and back of my head, my shaven scalp. And I've sort of projected wallpapers that I've invented of starting with my father's school blazer emblems from the breast pocket, and made a wallpaper out of elements from those laurel leaves, and then juxtaposed it with almost like a negative image of the front of my face, with this kind of Louis Vuitton wallpaper with World War I insignia. That's the sort of cross images is from World War South African Medal of Honor. And I really was toying with the different symbols that we've used to denote kind of status in the society and make ourselves feel and look important, perhaps, or...
So this is, in many ways, they're images of how we look at power.
Absolutely, they are.
And it seems that a lot of the work that are in this space do talk to the kind of questions of power. I'm going to take you to the rough color because one of the things I've been thinking about as I look at this is, of course, again, going back to the technique. But I think your technique in particular in the rough color is extraordinary and insane.
Yeah.
And I'd like to maybe hear a little bit more about that.
Sure.
This is just insane.
So this is a color. This is a European rough color that would have really denoted a lot of power and status in Europe. And I'm using quite a broad European sort of reference because a lot of countries in Europe used sort of the Dutch collar designs. And
that was Protestant, so that
very
was,
much so.
Whereas this would have been...
Well, there was also, it's the Elizabethan, it's the Dutch, it's a whole, there were a whole lot of collar making there were a whole lot of people who made those collars for the elite class and the ruling class. And what I've done here is I've taken elements from the old South African apartheid flag and sort of woven those. It's called mantling. It's the mantle that would have gone with the sort of plant motifs of the flag in the symbols of the flag, and I've just sort of adopted them into the design of the collar. I sort of really find it quite powerful to think about the associations that we have with all of these symbols. It speaks to a lot of the things from my past, I think.
You know, I mean, in academia, when you're writing a PhD or whatever, they talk about the golden thread. You know, and how it has to weave its way through. And what is extraordinary about this exhibition is how it weaves its way through. And so, whilst certain images may be one-dimensional, though they don't feel one-dimensional, this is profoundly three-dimensional, which is why I suppose just looking at your technique here, you talk about power with something like this. I'm interested in what that means for you as a South African, because it does, if we look at your videos, Rising and Falling, that is a lot about what it means to be a white man in South Africa, which comes back to issues of power or disempowerment.
Correct. I think that that's also one of the reasons why I was drawn to the substance of carbon paper, because of its obsolescence. And that started to resonate with me, with ideas around power and having to give up power and the way we perceive ourselves in relation to the rest of the country and society. And I think that your relationship to your privilege becomes an issue, and
move to the collars and formation. So we're talking power, clothing. Sometimes in this particular case, I'm thinking the military as well. The fact that it's called collars in formation. Tell us a little bit about that.
So my fascination with collars, I think, just grew out of rough collar. But to something a little bit more closer to the contemporary moment. And I found out that the detachable collar was created. I think there are a couple of urban legends around how it was created and why it was created. But the detachable collar did exist, and it was so that the shirt could be washed. The collar could be washed because it's so close to the neck and it gets dirty
quite quickly.
And I was fascinated about the designs, the different designs and sort of personalities that the different collars could have. And I particularly enjoyed the sort of the rounded collar like here that is called the Eton
Yes.
College design, and it was created because they wanted to have something that sort of placed them above the fray, you know, and because Eton College in Britain was the sort of school to get into and be part of. And I think that a lot of these uniforms that we sort of put on ourselves is about belonging. And everybody wants to belong somewhere. I think that's very much a human need.
So Paul, tell us about this particular work.
This is called Ex Unitate. The old South African flag motto. And it's an image of my body with this emblem projected onto the skin, and I've scratched it into the carbon paper, and I've left this whole area blank because I enjoyed the idea of the mind filling in something else that might kind of grow out of the sort of wallpaper effect that comes with the rest of the body, whatever that might be.
What are you saying here? What is?
I think that as a white person in South Africa, having benefited from apartheid, which is an era that I grew up in, I think that the way I perceive myself is what comes through with a lot of the imagery that one sees with these symbols, as much is as important as the way other people see me, how we see each other. The sort of symbols of power that were used to define power in the past has become important and still is important. And it's also, I suppose, these are lingering symbols that stick around even though they are undesirable. And the fact that they might be incredibly hurtful and come with a lot of really problematic imagery. It is still very much present, whether you like it or not.
Do you see it as a kind of cleansing?
It could be. I suppose it could be. I think there might be some kind of redemption in trying to confront the darkness of the past. And as you know, those kinds of shadows always keep popping up in the most unexpected places anyway. And if we don't, I think that if we don't confront and embrace those things, they will come up again and again and again. They always do.
We're going to go to that conversation, rising and falling. I mean, rising and falling has to be nailing the conversation of monuments and history. And yeah,
and having that uncomfortable conversation. Yeah, absolutely.
Rising, falling. What are we looking at here?
This is a video artwork that I've made.
Yeah.
Quite recently, I took an existing video of myself, and on my skin, I have the names of men who have died in the particular battles that resonate with those uniforms. And I projected this video of myself onto the monument to General Louis Botha, which is at the Union Buildings in Pretoria in South Africa. It was one night. We got permission to actually finally do it, which was a whole long rigmarole, but we got there and did the intervention. It was recorded and was being documented because the act of actually projecting myself onto this monument was as important as making the ultimate artwork. And then spliced in with that imagery of the nighttime monument, I've combined it with images, a time-lapse sequence of the sun moving through the sky and the shadows moving across the ground as the sun tracks across the sky from sunrise to sunset. And it's called Rising Falling because I wanted that kind of metaphor for the sun rising and falling on empires, as has happened throughout history. The monument clearly has had its day, and I think that it's important for us to relook at these things and try and understand what is the relevance. Is it relevant at all? And what does it mean? What does it mean to us as South Africa in 2021? Yeah. Why is it still there? Should it stay there, or should we? One of my kind of contentions, I think, with these monuments is to actually reactivate them in some kind of way.
Yeah.
And I think that
this would be
correct. I suppose one of my hopes is to inspire other artists perhaps to reactivate this dead looking monolith that's occupies such a central space at the Union.
And to question it.
Correct. And I think that that's quite a powerful way of subverting it.
Yeah.
And if you want, or really questioning and interrogating what its relevance is, as opposed to simply removing and silencing the conversation forever. Difficult, again, it's a difficult position to take because it has a lot of power and a lot of hurtful and a lot of pain for a lot of people, and which is completely relevant and totally understandable. So that kind of discussion is what I'm hoping to ignite with doing something like
I think also some of the images, and you see this in the making of the video as well, are, as you say, that pressed into your skin are the names of men from history who have died, whose story is simply not told.
Weren't told, absolutely. Yeah, they were recorded as in the same way that what white people would have been. Which goes to show and talks a lot about history being recorded by the victors. You know, that kind of one-sided, very deleterious version of history. That was what I wanted
by the lion.
Correct.
Yeah. It's a very beautiful piece. I mean, in the making of it, you spent, what, 24 hours?
So the first video was done a few years back and was called Remember, Dismember. The video of my body was called Remember, Dismember, and that was done a few years back. I had to do the research, find the names that were missing and disperse them amongst the names that were not. And have them pressed into the skin, make that whole video, and then to actually find the funding and the equipment to be able to, and of course the permission to actually do something like this took about 2 years to get that together.
Did anybody stop by and watch you?
Plenty. It's a very poignant moment in the production of this. We arrived there and the monument is actually being used as a sleeping place for a homeless person who was wrapped up in this blue blanket. And you know, the sort of staff, the grounds people who look after the monument for the union buildings wanted to chase him away because they knew that we were coming. We had our permission letter and everything. And I said, don't, because it was important to me actually that this is what it meant for him. The guy has no place to go. He is a homeless person. It speaks very powerfully about where we are in South Africa today. And here he is getting protection from the wind and the cold at the foot of such an enormous symbol of oppression. Anyway, again, very powerful. That was a very powerful moment.
I suppose in closing, I would ask, as you say, you don't believe they should go because if it stays, then the conversation remains. But it does remain up to artists like yourself to ensure that the conversation is out there.
I think so. It absolutely, I mean, if I had my way, some sort of commission could be set up where a contemporary artist would be selected to engage with this, maybe in a more, what I've done is a very ephemeral and momentary, impermanent intervention, but it could be something more permanent, something that goes up, that talks to this monument. Those are very interesting and powerful ways of dealing with the past. And I suppose that will remain my wish.
But we come to the end, which is actually the beginning, which is kind of an interesting thing in itself. And this is also the second blue piece.
Yeah,
A bit like Picasso,
the little piece.
The blue.
It is kind of. This is Homeland military epaulettes. And the dates I've managed to find of 1989 to 94 was what happened with this epaulette that was used by the military in Swaziland.
When it was Swaziland.
During the apartheid, correct. In the apartheid era, the military had their own kind of insignia, their own kind of, And I managed to find that in the military museum, here in Saxonwold. And I've sort of projected the image of it onto my skin and then scratched it into this piece of blue carbon paper. And I particularly enjoyed the kind of interaction between the old image of this epaulette coming with this sort of checkered design of the contemporary carbon paper. Two different eras, two different symbols, and almost like two different kind of wallpapers in a way.
Yeah.
Being sort of emblazoning this skin.
I mean, I must say, when I first looked at it, what struck me was how the ear of the man's, which is your head,
it's me,
is so similar to the epaulette. And just
I didn't even see that.
I mean, it's almost like a repetition of images. So you get a repetition of the checkers, and you get a repetition of. It's quite extraordinary, actually.
There were also times when I had started just working on the ear. It sort of spoke to an earlier work that I'd done many years ago that was quite embryonic. This sort of fetal embryo kind of coming out of the darkness sort of space and then turning into a more adult sort of image as this epaulette emerged.
We're closing with this image. It's, in fact, it could be one of your first images after your self-portrait. I suppose the question that I would have on this is, it's very small, it's an intimate piece. You didn't choose to work on this kind of size again. It's a small. I
would love to.
Yeah.
I would love to, if I get there. It's a, this was completed, this I did in 2020, last year. And it would be wonderful to go back and do another series, perhaps. And I've got enough carbon paper to do something like that. It just so happened that I did the one.
Is this going to be the closure of your time in the military power?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think so. No, I've got another project in the makings that if all goes well, that would take me back to Washington, DC.
Yeah.
In the United States, because I'd like to investigate the US's involvement in the sort of proxy conflicts that are going on in the Middle East because of my Middle Eastern heritage.
Yeah.
So no, I think the military is still there, I'm afraid.
However you choose to look at it.
However I choose, yep.
Yeah. And it's definitely not the end of the carbon paper journey either, is it?
Perhaps not. Not sure. I think I need a break. I need a break from. I wish I could take a sabbatical.
I'm expecting a pot plant with flowers coming.
I can imagine. It's just been wonderful.
Paul, it's an extraordinary exhibition. As I said, so much of it resonates with me because it is about what is present, but what is not present. And indeed, what is there but invisible. And I think that's That's very powerful. So I want to say thank you very much. And I hope people enjoy it as much as I've enjoyed looking at the work and spending time with you. So
It's really great. And thank you for coming. It's wonderful.
Paul, absolutely incredible.
Thanks, Michelle.
I think
I really,
it's
really.
going to be an extraordinary series of conversations.
Thank you so much, Paul and Michelle, for this illuminating walkabout. It was an absolute pleasure to listen to you and to see the works. Thank you very much for having the time and the opportunity to enjoy this. Now, Paul, I see we have some responses already, and it's a compliment. It comes from Rashida, and she says, Paul, your work is mesmerizing and stunning. We have been riveted watching and hearing you talk about your work. Beautiful work, incredibly beautiful. Thank you for UJ Art Gallery for making this possible and for us to join. Would be wonderful to see the exhibition. Regards. And from Willem, is it Willem Conradi?
Yes. Hello, Willem. Hello, Willem.
Says, thank you, Paul. That was amazing. And the same comes from Fiona Coleridge. Such a treat. Thank you.
Hi, Fiona.
Yes, wonderful. You know, Paul, when you ended your walkabout with Michelle, you referred to power structures and to the military. And incidentally, today is 9/11. And I don't know whether you could call it a fortuitous resonance that we have here.
No,
But
absolutely.
how do you feel about that you have your opening today?
Well, unplanned, of course, but I kind of liked the sort of resonance with my father's heritage. My father was Lebanese, and I think there's a field of study I'd really like to engage in the United States' involvement in the Middle East, which is something I'd like to go further with. And I think that that's quite powerful for me, powerful resonance with the work of my father on the shroud sort of image of Carbon Dad. So that's very strong for me.
Good. We were talking about it earlier today, about the idea of shadows, and that it can be scary or it can be playful or mythical. Children play with their own shadows.
Yep.
So you've got two elements here, and the one is substance and the other is shadows. And shadows do not have substance. Can you comment on that?
I think that shadows have always sort of, I've been drawn to them because of wanting to confront our own darkness. And I think I've always drawn artworks by scratching away the darkness into the light. That's how even as a student, that's what I was doing when I was making little etchings. I think that South Africa is haunted by shadows. I think the world is haunted by shadows. And I think that it's important for us to confront them. And those, otherwise, if we don't, they get projected in other ways.
Okay. I see we've gotten a question from Andre Krokam. How does liminality challenge power?
Andre. Hello, Andre. How does liminality change power? So I think that when one is in a liminal state, you are not fully in one specific place or form. You're between two different worlds, and you've got one foot in one reality and another foot in another, and it's quite a delicate and a very fragile time to be in. I mean, if we're in rites of passage, for instance, you're going through a liminal stage of life, and I think that by not actually being fully engaged in one world, people don't really know how to define you, and you're in a way undefined. So I think that can be quite subverting to power structures, really.
Thank you to Andre and to Paul. Another question from Kim Berman.
Hi, Kim.
She says, oh no, it's a comment, a lovely comment. Thank you, Kim. Extraordinary exhibition and walkabout. Thank you, Paul and the UJ Gallery. The work is humbling and heroic. Wonderful, Paul.
Hi, Kim.
Yeah, I see a question coming from Rika Stockenstroom. Hi, Paul and Neil. Paul, hi, Paul. Rika and Neil here. Fantastic exhibition. Thank you for the amazing work. Neil missed the part about what the powder or residue on the floor at the bottom of each piece means.
Okay. What does it mean? It doesn't have one particular meaning. I think I wanted to keep the residue as a kind of, it's definitely part of the work, and it is a kind of a negative space for what the work was before, and it becomes a kind of shadow in itself on the floor of a different kind, something that is not the traditional kind of shadow, but a kind of a negative space of what it was before. And I like that kind of idea. I even like the idea of people walking through it if they do.
I also like the idea, it's that sort of, it's the residue, but it's also a detritus.
It's a remnant in a way.
Behind, but it's also very substantial.
Correct. I also enjoyed that process, and also just emerged, from experimenting with the material.
Yeah, and I'm always very concerned about the fragility of your work, but I think you explained very well during the walkabout that the work is not so fragile, but it looks
very fragile. Yeah, I mean, you can rip it, you can tear it if you really want to, and you can pierce it. I mean, I pierced it a lot with the blade while I was scratching away, but then I just left it as is. It was difficult for me to do at first, but I decided to keep it that way.
Paul, in your walkabout, you referred to your stance about monuments.
Yes.
And I think within the South African context, it is a very important issue or a challenge at this stage. What is your thoughts?
We are still struggling to figure out, I think, the sort of famous monument wars that are raging around the colonized world at the moment is a very hot topic. And I like the idea of reactivating these monuments and questioning their relevance in a post-colonial context, which we are in. It is a contentious issue for a lot of people because there are huge symbols of oppression, and we can find new ways of dealing with that. That might not necessarily involve taking them down. Perhaps artists, young new artists, can be commissioned to engage with them in different ways, and keep the conversation alive. That was something that I was drawn to.
I can associate with that.
Yeah, I think it's an important conversation that we need to have. And so that's also an area of study that I find incredibly interesting and would like to take further.
Okay. I see we have a comment on the residue from Fiona Coolridge. The residue also reminds me of ashes, religious and death reverence.
Definitely.
Yeah,
especially with the work of my father and with the veil of my parents. I was caregiver to both of them in their very last years, and so that resonates very strongly with me. And it applies to an artwork. It can apply to an artwork like this.
Rika Stockenstroom says it's almost like the shadows left of the Hiroshima atomic bomb victims.
Yes.
Very true.
Yeah, that was the atomic bomb blasts at Hiroshima and Nagasaki was an inspirational starting point for me working with this carbon paper. and the image that was, say, for instance, victims of the blast, if they were wearing dresses or clothes, the patterns were actually etched into the skin. And that was a very powerful image for me, that drew me to carbon paper.
Sure, yeah, that's the association is there. You can't neglect
very
it.
strong.
Helene Smith says, "Hi Paul, thanks for a
Hi,
marvelous
Helene.
exhibition. The veil was suspended as a disc before hanging it in a way it is hanging now. That disc was that disc was a very evocative form and image too. Any comments on that?"
It's such an amazing. Why did it happen? I knew the veil exists as an oval, abstract form to begin with. That is how you construct a wedding veil, or any veil, I suppose. And I suspended it quite by chance again, because I wanted to make some changes to the way I had joined the carbon paper.
Yeah.
It was purely a mechanical process. And I resuspended it in my studio like that. And for the first time, I could see my own body in relation to this enormous disc hanging in my studio. And I just knew that I had to do something with that shape. And before it gets gathered to take on its final form as a veil and positioned on the head, that process is a permanent process. And so it can never return to that pre-veil sort of oval shape. And I wanted to document that as some kind of...
It will never go back to that.
Never go back to that oval shape again.
Yeah.
So that was a very poignant moment for me, and I wanted to keep and have a record of that.
Yes, I think it's very important what you say there. The documentation of the suspension or the installation of the veil is available in video format on the Moving Cube at movingcube.uj.ac.za. The most beautiful video, most touching. Another question from Kim Berman. Have you got plans for this work to travel after your exhibition?
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely, we do. The wonderful thing about the Moving Cube is it's visible, so visible to anywhere in the world, and that's something I think is immensely powerful.
Yeah, and it makes it so accessible to anybody.
Correct, yeah.
All over the globe.
Yeah,
fantastic.
Any artist would just love that.
Another question coming from Corne. I enjoy how the work reminds me of X-rays in a way.
Yeah.
The showing of what is beneath the skin. Your work resonates on so many levels. Thank you for sharing your work.
Wow, what a nice comment.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Corne.
It does remind one of X-rays. That's another, even up against the light, it has that same sort of feel.
Does, no? There was this reference to luminarity, now to X-rays. It's that transparency that comes through in all these works. And then sometimes you look again for the substance, but then you are detracted and looking at the not substance.
Yes, absolutely.
The things that are
it's
not
like the
visible.
negative, yeah, the absence of things.
Yeah.
I've always been drawn to that.
Yeah, and then obviously you work from you don't work in a positive way in the sense that you inscribe something on a medium. You
Correct,
work on the negative.
Yep.
You take away from the medium.
Yep.
And that's where the residue comes from.
Correct, yeah. Working from the darkness to the light. That's been my process.
Yeah. In the walkabout, you suss that out very quickly. You don't have to go for any therapy.
Well, I don't know about that.
I wonder if we have any more questions coming in. Paul, what can I say? This is a magnificent exhibition.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to know you and to get to know you.
Oh, thank you.
And to walk this path with you.
It's been a fabulous experience for me too. It's an amazing space, a wonderful platform, and I've enjoyed every minute.
Good, I'm so happy. Thank you all for sharing this morning with us for this actual opening of Paul Emmanuel's Substance of Shadows exhibition. The exhibition will be on until the 2nd of October. You can make bookings to come in groups of 10 on the walkabout dates, that is in September and October, or you can make a personal booking and come at a specific, join at a specific time slot. Enjoy the rest of the morning. Please go to movingcube.uj.ac.za. There's the most fantastic information about Paul Emmanuel on it, on the website. And you can go at your own leisure and watch the videos, this walkabout of this morning, and get some more background information and get the enrichment of substance of shadows. Thank you for joining us.